Stanford University.
My name is Joe Paluska. I lead the Global Communications and Policy team for Better Place, which the company's story begins actually in part here in Stanford. We started in October 2007, but in the summer of 2007, Shai Agassi, our founder and CEO, enlisted the help of a handful of Stanford MBAs to help us with our business plan and our modeling. So thank you, and thank you for your colleagues for helping us with the company. Just to get a sense of the audience, how many here are familiar with Better Place or familiar with our model? Great. Almost everyone. Great. Thank you for that too. I've been with the company since before day one, before we publicly launched the company. I met Shai in the spring of '07, and he told me this fabulous idea that he had of ending the world's addiction to oil and how you can do that through a mobility operator network that's powered by renewable energy that fuels zero-emission vehicles, and how he was on the course of raising then $200 million, which was right before the crash, which was this phenomenal story that caught my attention. And I worked with him to figure out how we'd publicly launch then what we called Project Better Place in October 2007. So what I thought I'd do today is get everyone up to speed on where we stand with the company and hopefully entertain as many questions as you guys have. We've done a lot in 2.5 years. It's pretty remarkable. Our story, as you know, is Shai's challenge with this question by the young global leaders in the World Economic Forum of 2005, how do you make the world a better place by 2020? He writes a white paper about how do you run a country without oil. He shops that white paper around with a series of political and business leaders around the world, enlisting input from people, notably Israeli President Shimon Peres, former US President Bill Clinton, and a handful of others. And ultimately, that white paper becomes our business model and our business plan that then Shai shops around to Vantage Point Venture Partners right up the street in San Bruno, and Israel Corp, which is one of our original investors, a large publicly traded holding company on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange that, ironically enough, owns the world's largest fleet of oil tankers and also owns all of the oil refineries in Israel. So we get it funded in our Series A of $200 million back in October, and the model is pretty simple. You're trying to exploit the delta between what we call the gas mile and the electric mile. The way we calculate the gas mile is you take miles per gallon, you take the price of gas divided by miles per gallon, and in the US at $2.50, $3 a gallon, it's about a 10 cents gas mile versus the electric mile, which we calculate as the cost of batteries plus renewable electricity, which on average around the world is about 6 to 8 cents a mile. So in the US, the margin that we're trying to attack is that 10-cent gas mile versus our 8-cent mile, which gives us an operating profit of about 2 cents per mile, which is nothing compared to Europe, where the price of gas is $7.50, $8 a gallon. During the height of when oil was $147 a barrel, in places like Germany and Turkey, gas was $11, $12 a barrel. It's in part leveraged by the price of gasoline or price of the barrel, and also government policy. So in a place like Denmark, one of our first two markets, Israel and Denmark are our first two markets. Denmark, they have, among other policies, they have a government policy that says when you buy a vehicle, when you buy a gas car, they're going to tax you up to 180% on the purchase price of that vehicle based on the size of the engine. So if you're not that smart and you're in Denmark and you decide to buy a Hummer, they're going to charge you 180% times that sales price. If you buy a zero-emission vehicle in Denmark, there's a 0% tax on the purchase of that vehicle. So when you combine $8 a gallon gas in Denmark plus government policy that says 0% tax on zero-emission vehicles and 180% tax on gas vehicle purchases, the economics become extremely compelling. The other part of our story that we probably don't play up enough is the energy side of the equation. So how we're working with utilities, where do we get our sources of energy, and that sort of thing. So again, Denmark would probably be the best case example where Dong Energy is one of our partners and one of our shareholders. Dong is the state-owned Danish oil and natural gas utility there, and they also are the largest provider of wind generation. So the government policy says in Denmark we want to have 20% generation by wind. We actually want to increase it to 40%. But what happens in Denmark and most places around the world is that the wind tends to blow at night or early in the morning when demand for electricity is low. So what Dong and other utility players in Denmark do is they actually have to either sell that energy, the wind energy, at night at extremely low prices, usually around 1 cent a kilowatt, to places like Sweden and Germany, or they actually have to ground the energy. So in our model, what we do is we harness that wind energy and we put it into the network that powers our vehicles and the batteries in the cars to become, at scale, a distributed storage model, and that then enables the utility to bring more wind, or in other places solar, online. So again, it's purchasing renewable sources of energy, where they're available, where it's cost effective, powers our network that powers the cars. In our network, there are two ways to charge your car. The way that you're actually going to do it the most is with the charge spot. The charge spot gets the least amount of publicity by the media and the least amount of attention because it looks kind of like a contemporary fire hydrant or a contemporary parking meter. And in our model, the way we calculate it is we estimate that roughly every driver is going to have two charge spots. You're going to have one at home and one at work. Why? Because most of the time, when you go home at night, your car is parked and it's charging at night, or your car is parked during the day at your office and charging. It's for the extended trip, the trip from San Francisco to LA, from San Francisco to Tahoe, where you'll swap out the battery. And that's the part of our story that probably gets the most attention and is probably the most controversial. It's what we call the battery switch station or the battery exchange station. And so here it's where we view the battery as part of the infrastructure. It's the consumer doesn't own the battery. The battery is a consumable. And so what that means is the car manufacturers need to design vehicles that enable the battery to come in and out from underneath the bottom of the vehicle. And the batteries are our investment. And I'll show you what we just demonstrated in Tokyo about 2 weeks ago. From a consumer perspective, it also allows you better affordability. Because if you want to buy an electric vehicle today, you have to pay with a fixed battery, you have to pay for that battery. And right now, the total cost of that battery to the consumer is somewhere between $12,000 and $15,000. The way we view it is that the cost of a battery right now is about $500 per kilowatt hour. And we believe, and so does the US government and financial analysts, that the cost of that battery is going to go down to about $350 a kilowatt hour over the next 5 years. Again, to the more probably macro piece of our model, we assume the cost of oil is going to rise, and that hopefully in the US there will be a price of carbon, but outside the US there is a price of carbon. So the price of fossil fuels and oil will rise over time, and that the price of battery and renewable energy will decline over time. And so it's that widening delta and that crease in the delta that's our operating margin. So the other thing with the swappable battery for the consumer is it allows you to take that extended range drive, right? It eliminates the fear of an electric vehicle. Historically, the issue with electric vehicles is that they look like a golf cart, or they have 3 wheels, or they have limited range because you're tethered by the size of the battery. If the battery can come in and out, and you have a ubiquitous infrastructure that allows you to charge it anywhere you go and to swap the battery out, you can have the same freedom of range and of mobility in an electric vehicle that you have with a gas car. So that is kind of our model. We've raised almost $700 million to date in about a little over 2 years, right? For us, that's a huge victory. It's kind of during the nuclear winter of fundraising. We've been able to raise all this money. And recently, that was a Series B round this past January. from $350 million that valued us at $1.25 billion. It was, to our knowledge, it's the largest round in clean tech history. But importantly, it brought in large global banks. And that was from HSBC, from Morgan Stanley Investment Management, and from Lazard Asset Management, along with our Series A investors coming back in. What I'm obligated to tell about HSBC is that they did their homework. They spent almost a year with us. They came in at it actually hugely skeptical about the economics of the model and also the fact, again, this notion of a battery switch and battery switch stations. And they spent almost a year doing due diligence with us. They did their own course of due diligence with us, and then they went out and hired 5 firms that are experts in battery technology, in accounting, in market sizing, in cars, and had those firms evaluate us. And they all came back and at the end of the cycle decided to put in about $125 million of the $350, took a 10% stake, and now have a seat on our board. What HSBC, Morgan Stanley, and Lazard, along with our Series A investors, also help us with is they have enormous relationships around the world. This is, for us, it's a big ecosystem play. It's a $3 trillion market opportunity. We can't do it alone, and so we need an ecosystem of partners and of relationships in order to kind of move the big levers that we want to move the world off of oil for transportation and onto electric vehicles powered by renewable energy. So we've had a busy April. We've had more traction in China in the past 60 days than we've had in the US in the past 2.5 years. And we've had more traction with Japan in the past year than we've had with the US in the past 2.5 years. So even though we're located just over in Stanford Research Park by the Institute of Medicine, most of the time we're outside of the US, talking to governments, talking to partners, trying to build our networks outside of the US. So what I'm going to show you next is a short video. What's happening is, in terms of the milestones to watch for, is by the end of this year in Israel, our first market, what you're going to see is us do our first full network test. So test the charge spots, the battery switch station, the software that manages the car, the battery, the infrastructure, and then the software that also interconnects back to the utilities to help with load balancing, among other things. So what we've done is we've actually divided up our network test into a series of tests around the world. One of them being in Tokyo, where we're 2 for 2. The Japanese government has invited us in twice now as the only foreign company to help them evaluate EVs as a market opportunity. Japanese government is trying to understand where the auto industry is going next and wants to look to EV. Obviously, with Toyota having the lion's share of hybrid technology, they're viewing EVs as the next logical step. Japan also wants to study our model because they are the 3rd largest consumer of oil behind the US and behind China. So I think they're 95% dependent on oil. And they also have, most of the Japanese cities are mega cities. And so they have, historically have a lot of low urban level pollution in addition to the CO2 that impacts climate. So what the Minister of Environment and Trade has done in Japan is they asked us about 6 or 7 months ago to do a taxi project, which for us was awesome because taxis are kind of the power user segment of the auto industry, right? In places like New York, taxis operate 24 hours a day. It's 2 shifts a day. Each driver drives on average about 240 miles per shift. And those cars are the livelihood of both the driver and the operator. So the cars have to be constantly running. The cars also represent about 20% CO2. And then obviously low-level urban particulate matter in cities. So if you can move the cars off of gas and onto electric, the cities can begin to clean the cities for smog, and the drivers get a cleaner thing. So I'll let the video roll, and then I'll kind of explain what happens afterwards, and we can play it again if you're interested in seeing it.
The first CT taxis will be able to switch their batteries here. And by switching the batteries, they'll be able to extend the range. The battery switch process takes as little as 60 seconds, and that's much shorter than filling up a regular taxi. Here, we're capable of handling as many as 12 batteries to ensure a constant supply of freshly charged batteries to the EVs. The batteries are charged in a temperature-controlled environment, and that ensures safety, reliability, and efficiency of the batteries. This facility opens up at 8 in the morning, and it goes on until 2 in the morning. And that enables the taxis to operate just like other regular taxis. Well, in Tokyo, taxis represent 2% of the total cars, but they're responsible for 20% of total emissions. So by eliminating taxi emission, we'll be eliminating a large chunk of tailpipe emissions.
So if you go to Tokyo today, and if you've seen the movie Lost in Translation with Bill Murray, the hotel that they shot it in, the Grand Hyatt, is in Roppongi Hills. You can drive in one of those vehicles. That's a fully electric. In this country, we call it a Nissan Rogue, but it's a Nissan Dualis in Asia. And the battery comes in and out. For me, it's super cool because we've moved off of presentations into real kind of hardware and software that's in the ground. So the experience is phenomenal. You get in the car. I was with Shai when we launched it April 26th at a press conference. You get in the cars are so quiet that we could whisper in the back seat and have a conversation. It's stunning how quiet the cars are. The technology itself, we engineered and designed the entire battery switch station, but we contracted with a very large Japanese industrial company to install it, a name that I'm not allowed to tell you who it is, but you would recognize who they are. And we also partnered with Nihon Kotsu, which is the largest taxi operator in Tokyo. So these are real live cabs with real live taxi drivers, with real live paying passengers going into them. There are 3 cabs in Tokyo. We'll run a 90-day project. For us, it's a development cycle. We're trying to learn as much as we can off of user behavior with the drivers in particular, because they have a small meter or monitor in their cabs that show the level of the battery and some other diagnostics on the battery themselves. So, mentally, are they going to be compelled to want to go and switch out that battery when the battery hits 80%, 70%, 60%? Kind of when do they think they need to swap out the battery? When we go to full scale, all that will be automated, so you won't have to worry about when to change the battery. But we're just trying to understand just some human behavior around it. There's a ton of data off the batteries themselves. I've probably learned more about batteries than I care to, but what I've learned is that every battery is unique. It's almost like every battery has its own unique fingerprint or DNA. So the way you charge the battery, right? The battery is the most expensive asset in the vehicle. So you want to, the kind of the care and feeding and the charging of that battery has to be optimal and has to be under optimal conditions. So what happens is the cars will pull in, the depleted battery will come out. You saw the robot take the battery away to a battery storage facility right next to the switching lane. And what happens there is that's a temperature-controlled environment where then we can take another evaluation of the battery and the battery diagnostics, charge the battery under optimal conditions. It takes about 30-35 minutes to recharge a 24 kilowatt hour battery to full state, and then that battery is ready to go again. This is the major test for us, a major milestone. We've split kind of the network testing in 2. The second piece of it is underway in Copenhagen, in Denmark. We launched it back in December in time for the UN Summit on Climate Change, the COP15 summit. And there we're testing the charge spots and how they charge fixed battery vehicles. So we have about 50 charge spots deployed throughout Copenhagen. charging a variety of fixed battery electric vehicles from Renault, Fiat. I think we have 2 Teslas there. And those kind of 2 tests will continue over the next couple of quarters. All that learning and actually the infrastructure itself is in Israel right now. All of that is also being tested in Israel so that by the time we get to the 4th quarter of this year, all of the components will be in the ground on a limited scale. We'll bring in about 10 Renault vehicles with swappable batteries to do the first end-to-end network test, and then we'll scale up again, and work out all the bugs as we go to full commercial launch in both Israel and in Denmark in the second half of 2011, which is when Renault, our car partner for Europe, is bringing in the cars. We'll go to China now. So China, again, we're a very young company. We've only done 2 car shows in our history, and the first one was the Frankfurt Motor Show from last September, and the second one was this past April, so last month, is Beijing Auto China in Beijing. Huge show. But the thing you need to understand about China is about 9 or 10 months ago, they set an industrial policy that, if you kind of follow the category, shocked the world. They set an industrial policy that says they're going to be the #1 manufacturer of EVs by 2015 at 500,000 units a year. They've set an incentive for the purchase of vehicles right now by fleets and by government owners of about $8,800 for the incentive. They've told their 13 largest cities to prepare for EVs on the infrastructure side and for the production. They have primarily 10 large domestic automobile manufacturers. They've asked those automobile manufacturers to both consolidate but also to begin to develop EVs. So they're going to be 65% dependent on foreign oil imports by 2020. If you've been to Beijing or any of the large cities, you see the pollution in those cities. So they see EVs as a level playing field. There's no baggage with the 100-year-old internal combustion engine, so they can drop their addiction to US technology. They can end their addiction to Japanese hybrid technology, and they can end their addiction to European diesel technology by going straight to EV. What does China do best? They do manufacturing best, and they do consumer electronics best. So what they're doing is they're taking what they do best and put it into electric vehicle infrastructure. HSBC, as I mentioned, is one of our investors. We asked HSBC to run the numbers on global market share and forecast out who the winners and losers are going to be. Right now, China has about 3% of the global EV market share. Keep in mind the global EV market share, we could probably count on my 2 hands in this room right now, and 2 of them are at Tesla, and 3 of them are at Better Place right now. It's a very, very small market, but what HSBC says is that by 2016, China will overtake Japan for a global lead of the EV market, and by 2019, China will overtake the US for leadership of the global EV market. So that by 2020, China will have 30% of the world's global EV market share. They have a large auto show that we participated in because we signed an MOU with a company called Chery Automotive, Chery with 1 R. Chery is the largest independent brand in China for automobiles. They are also the largest exporter of cars. For example, if you go to Santiago, Chile, they make a lot of the gas taxi cabs that are driving around in Santiago. So what we announced is that we're going to work with Chery to develop switchable battery electric vehicles for both domestic China production and consumption and for export. Probably all of you are skeptical about China in terms of quality of services and technologies, but when you go there and see what's going on, they are improving, right? You'll see in one of these slides that Beijing Auto, or the acronym is BAIC, or it's pronounced Baichi. Baichi acquired from Saab, as GM was selling Saab at the end of last year, Baichi acquired the old Saab 9.5 and 9.3 platforms. So if you drive a Saab 9.5 and 9.3, a Chinese company now owns that platform. So we are working with, while we haven't formally announced it, we're working with Baichi on the Saab 9.5 and 9.3 platforms to make them fully electric with swappable batteries in and out. So let me just show you a couple of highlights. Chery has a number of brands, and one of the brands is Rich with 2 I's. I think they did Chery with 1 R and Rich with 2 I's because they probably couldn't get the URLs for that. But here, this is a Rich G5. It's a 4-door, 5-seat sedan, where this is just a concept car, but this is one of the vehicles that we're going to be looking at to develop for fully electric with swappable battery. Again, it's just another photo of it. So we were part of the Chery booth. We had the demonstration vehicle with our battery swap underneath, and we also had our charge spots, and then we have a charging tower on the side here. And again, this is just a photo of our charging infrastructure. This is the old Saab 9.5, right, which they now call the C71. And what they've done is they've storyboarded out below the battery switch technology. And then what they did was they modified, for the show, they modified a Saab 9.5 with our help to put the battery underneath. So here, there are some mirrors so you can see underneath the vehicle, and this is looking down at the mirror. But they've put, this is their battery and their latching system. And with the Saab platforms are European and US safety and standard tested. So the point is that if we all are skeptical about the quality of Chinese products and manufacturing and services, they're buying non-Chinese technology to leapfrog and get them up to where they need to be, as well as developing and improving their technology. They fully get it. They fully get it, and they get both the market opportunity and the environmental benefit of electric vehicles, and they are running as fast as hell to do it, to be the market leader, because they view it as a level playing field. We were able to host a number of Chinese dignitaries. The first is the vice premier, but somewhat a little bit more meaningful is the mayor of Beijing. Beijing will probably be one of the first markets that we roll out a pilot program in. And then what you'll see in the next series of slides is that obviously the theme of the show, or maybe not obviously, but the theme of the show is around electric cars. And what you're seeing is that everybody, both the Chinese domestic manufacturers and the foreign manufacturers, are showing electric cars. You're probably very familiar with the electric Mini and also the Nissan Leaf. And what you'll see with this, this is actually the IAT is kind of a tier 1 vendor in China, and you'll see that they've also developed a battery switch technology. Surprised to see IAT. The photo's not tremendously good. But they have a concept car with battery switch, and then they have a storyboard around battery switch. So in China, you had 3 domestic automobile manufacturers, or 2 automobile manufacturers and a components provider show battery switch technology. So we're thrilled. So that's where we stand. We go live in Israel and Denmark late next year. We're still testing the network. We'll fully test it at the end of this year. We've got these really exciting projects for us running around outside of the US. Inside the US, we'd like to see more action by both industry and by the US government. I'm not hopeful on today's news about the climate legislation introduced, but we'll see how it goes. So with that, I'd love to take any questions that you have. Sir.
Yeah, so you quoted you hope to get to $350 a kilowatt hour for your cost of batteries. To get to a 100-mile range, so you've got to end up somewhere in the zip code of 30 kilowatt hours of storage. You can't use 100% of what battery. So you end up with a capital cost of your battery in excess of $10,000. So if I divide that by useful life, let's say 100,000 miles, which strikes me as a little bit large, I get to a 10 cents a mile cost just for the battery. And you haven't paid cost of capital, cost of labor, your switching stations, etc. So how do you get to 6 to 8 cents a mile?
So 24 kilowatt hour battery gets us a 100-mile range. So what was our assumption? Our assumptions on our models are 200,000. It's 2,000 cycle battery, so 200,000 miles per battery. And about $500 a kilowatt hour.
That still strikes me as well, 6, 7 cents when you include the cost of capital. Right there.
Do you mind identifying where you're from? Are you a venture capitalist as well, or no? Okay. Well, I'm happy to go over the numbers with you. Okay.
He knows how to multiply.
I'm in PR. I don't. Sir.
Yeah, I was just going to ask. Okay, so where's the electricity come from to fuel this vehicle fleet in Beijing?
It's going to come from dirty sources, right?
Okay.
But if you look at the American Lung Association,
Total environmental impact, while it may be more efficient in terms of the electric drive, it seems to me there's another side of the equation, that's the development of a better, cleaner electricity network in China deserves perhaps even more investment and more energy. You could argue that running the cars on natural gas and making this equivalent investment in cleaner electricity for the rest of the country might offer the same environmental benefits.
that's not our business model, right? We're enabling the investment. You're absolutely right. But we're enabling others to come in and make those investments. Our model is about the infrastructure that enables the cars. And so we want to bring in additional partners that make those kind of investments in clean power plants. And by the way, if you look at the studies, if you look at, obviously we've got Israel Electric Corp and Dong Energy, but there's some US studies out of Pacific Northwest Labs that talk about the impact on the grid. You'll see that if you do, it's the intelligent charging part, it's the software that helps basically balance the load between the aggregate of the cars and the utility. There's minimal impact on the grid. Yes?
Hi. I want to know, a normal battery pack probably went about 100,000 miles, and especially with fast charge, level 3, 400 volt, 125 amps, you're probably using that to charge the batteries. It will even degrade faster. So it's probably, let's say, 80,000 miles. So you have all these batteries that degrade so fast. How are you going to dispose them? And also, with the battery technology advances, you not only have to stop the old style of battery like lithium ion, you have to stop the new one like lithium air or maybe nanowire or who knows what.
Yeah.
So it could go into a really big mess. So
It could be. So on the battery chemistry, we think that lithium ion is going to be the horse to bet on for some time. So lithium, zinc air, lithium, other chemistries are future technologies. On the degradation of the battery, keep in mind, most of the this is the part that gets lost, I think, most people. Most of the charging is trickle charging or standard charging at home or at work. It's only for the extraordinary drive or the long drive when you have to switch out the battery, that then the battery goes into the switch station and does get not fast charge, quick charge, right? About 30, 35 minutes in a temperature controlled environment and in an environment where we know the history of that battery, and so we know how much energy to put in and we're able to monitor it. So I think your assumptions on your assumptions are right that we're going to need a lot of batteries, but probably not as many as you think.
Well, how are you going to dispose them if they all
Yeah.
with no efficiency?
So there's second life. So there's a lot of research on second life applications, whether it's in the home or in utilities or in the grid. Our partners, we're somewhat battery agnostic. Our partners are A123 out of Boston and a joint venture between Nissan and NEC called AESC. And through them and through our own means, there are green supply chain initiatives, and that's how we'll recycle the batteries. Sorry.
Are you moving in the direction of open standards for battery design, and anybody, including competitors, can participate in that?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a woman named Ziva Patir who's on our global team but works out of Israel for us, who is our standards expert. So we participate on SAE and ISO and all of the international standards bodies. What we found is globally there's kind of two camps, right? There's the car guys and the utility guys, and we're in between. So it's a fight to be able to provide our perspective into those two camps. But you're seeing, at least on the on the plug itself, there are around the world there are broadly two standards, right? There's kind of the European standard and there's the North America Japan standard. Ultimately there'll be one, and it'll probably be developed out of China, and the rest of the world have to adopt it. Sir.
How do you think about the fact that some automakers may want to have proprietary, not battery chemistry designs, but battery pack configurations for their own purposes? And so you may see not a proliferation of chemistries, but of battery pack configurations. Does that affect your model in any way?
Yeah, it does. The way we think about it is that the car manufacturers and the battery manufacturers ultimately will come up with a standard or several standards for vehicles or for batteries. So much like if you go to a gas station and you have different grades of octane, right? We believe that there will be ultimately 4, 5, 6 kind of form factors or standards of batteries that all the car manufacturers will share. It's early days right now, so you know, if you take Renault and Nissan, right, they share the same CEO, they have cross-equity ownership, they in fact share the same battery supplier in AESC, but the form factor and the size of those batteries that Renault's using in their vehicles versus the Nissan Leaf vehicle are completely different. What kind of our simple criteria is, the battery has to come in and out from below the vehicle. And logically, from design perspective, it makes a lot of sense. But that's what we're, when we speak to car manufacturers, that's kind of our opening point. Sorry?
A couple of questions on having a battery at the bottom of the car. So how do you get the car manufacturer to move it from behind the back seat to the bottom of the car? And how do you control its temperature when you're driving the car? Are you trying to keep it warm or keep it cold? What happens when you drive down the road in snow or rain?
Yep.
It seems like it's not otherwise the ideal place to put the battery.
Well, that's why we picked both Denmark, a cold environment, and Israel, a hot environment, to test the cars. So for Renault, for example, what they determined probably 2 years ago is they're going to take this C-Class sedan platform, but they didn't want to modify it so that so that you could put basically a pancake-style battery so it could simply come in and out. So what they had to do was extend the rear of the vehicle a bit so that the battery actually looks more like an L on its side. So that part of the battery comes up behind the back seat, and then the rest of it comes in from underneath. The future, the next generation of vehicles that Renault is designing that I can't go into much detail, they're moving to kind of that pancake-style battery that's going to come in underneath so that they don't either have to extend the platform or the chassis of the vehicle and potentially lose the trunk space in the back.
Do you have to condition the battery with
The heat and
air?
yeah, there are certain both software things that we're going to do to the battery, but also through air and other means to cool the battery and heat the batteries in those conditions.
Does it take more energy? Is that more
Does it drain the battery?
Yeah, is that more of a drain than having it behind the back seat like it is now, or
It's-
is that better for it?
Which way?
Below the car, is that a more efficient place to put the battery?
It's a more efficient way for a consumer experience and also for the design of the car.
It's not immediately obvious.
You're welcome to come over and see us anytime. I'll go to you two, please.
I was wondering, how do you plan on dealing with the cost of upgrading the electric infrastructure locally near charging points and charging stations? And how do you see splitting that cost with utility companies or city governments? And secondly, do you have an operations research team yet to analyze all the data that you're collecting?
Are you graduating soon? So on the operations research team, we do, but you can send me your information and we'll take a look at it. Sorry, what was I got sidetracked by the appeal for a job.
How do you plan on managing the local
the upgrades to
electric
right.
infrastructure upgrade costs?
So first of all, the cost is our cost. So on the consumer side, it's a little bit like the DirecTV model, right? If you want DirecTV satellite service, there's a truck roll, DirecTV comes out, puts the dish on your home, and you pay for the monthly subscription, right? There's an embedded cost of that satellite dish, but you as the consumer aren't paying it up front. It's baked into the monthly subscription fee. So on the consumer side, that's actually on the whole infrastructure side, that's our model. On what I would say the public charge spots, what we've learned a lot in 2.5 years. I think originally we thought there'd be more of a mix between consumer and kind of corporate campuses and public charge spots. But what we're realizing is that you need fewer public charge spots. You need more charge spots at the home and in the office and in some retail locations. But it's not like you go down to University Avenue in Palo Alto and you're going to need charging spots. Because what we've also learned is anytime you have to dig, right, it's a no-brainer. If you have to dig, that's an enormous cost. And so we don't want to have to dig to put in the charge spots. We're looking for how can we rapidly wire parking lots and rapidly wire homes without having to dig. With the utilities, again, it's on the upgrade to the infrastructure. What I would urge you to think about is, again, software. Software manages most of the load, right? It manages both the distributed load and then the central load that's back at our data center. So the research that our utility partners have done is that there's little investment needed either on the generation side or on the grid side. Obviously, every grid is local and unique, but based on what we've seen in Israel, Denmark, Australia, and then the research we've seen out of the US, it's not a cost-prohibitive hurdle to cross.
Okay. Are you looking at maybe distributed generation for where instead of digging up power lines and upgrading the whole system to all the way to a substation?
We've thought about it. Yeah, we've talked to, if you're familiar with Suntech, Suntech is local, but they're out of China. We've thought about what if you could wire, the Google parking lot, you put solar PV, wire that, and then it goes right into the charge spots. But we've not developed that technology, or developed that kind of integration yet.
Okay, yeah, my question is actually very similar. So, but it's more regional specific to Beijing. As you may or may not know, the grid in Beijing is actually maxed out at the moment. So, and you said you will put test pilot projects in Beijing very soon. And what are you going to do about it? And what are upgrading the grid right now? It may not be in place for you. You have your pilot projects.
Yeah, so the pilot projects will probably be similar in scale to start with as the Tokyo project. So, 90-day proof of concept where the impact will be minimal on the grid. But you're right, as it scales, that's where we're going to need investors and other partners in the Chinese government to help out.
So you're actually working with the investors to implement
Yeah,
this?
HSBC, as you probably are aware of, Hong Kong, Shanghai Bank. So they are kind of true experts in all things China. Sorry, sir, I took one from you.
Hi. Can you talk a little bit about the vehicle-to-grid type of scenario, and do you have any kind of business model around arbitrage with electric prices and such?
Not on the arbitrage per se. First of all, on vehicle-to-grid, we think that's a technology that's at best 5 years away. So it's probably 5 to 10 years away.
Even though you have these battery charging stations with all this battery storage?
It's not, we don't believe it's mature technology yet. So you're probably right. By the time we get, we'll have countrywide networks in Israel and Denmark at the end of next year, and then additional infrastructure in 2012. So probably by the time that everything is scaling in, say, 3, 4, 5 years from now, that technology will also be maturing, and we'll look to incorporate it in. But on the ancillary services side, back to the utility and the revenue that we generate from that, we're definitely looking at that component right now. Sir?
I wonder if you might be able to clear up how you'd be paying back investors on what looks to me like a pretty capital-intensive situation here.
Well, it's a great question. It's not, so if you take Vantage Point, for example, are you from a venture capital firm? All right. If you take Vantage Point, they would admit it's an unusual investment for them, right? They're definitely taking a long-term view on it. If you talk to Alan Saltzman, the CEO there, the industry transition is a 10 to 15-year transition. But what they've seen in our model is that when you look at the cost to both put in the infrastructure and to power the infrastructure relative to this thing called oil, right? And that there are no competitors to oil on transportation, in effect, right? It's a blanket statement, but oil largely has 100% market share around the world for transportation. So we're going after that kind of fat profit by coming in with a cheaper, more convenient, affordable solution. On HSBC, by contrast to Vantage Point in a classic Silicon Valley VC and HSBC in probably the world's largest bank, HSBC looks us as what they call a transformational investment. So they look at us for what we do as the returns that we provide as a standalone company, but they also look at us as enabling either other new companies or other traditional companies to profit from this transition to electric transportation. And so while their investment right now is just in us, they look at us as kind of the spark for other future investments, or they're invested in PSA, the owners of Peugeot and Citroën, right? So they're going to their institutional investments and saying, hey guys, why aren't you going faster to electric? So I don't know if that explains the mindset, but they've seen the light, and the future is electric mobility, and they see us as having a unique differentiated position in the market, both for us as a standalone company, but also what we do for the broader industry. And that's what they're playing on. Gentlemen.
What's your barrier to entry? Because you were talking about IAT has got a battery switch technology. What keeps you from spending all this money to test it, and then somebody else just comes in and does battery switch technology?
I think our CEO would argue that that's a good thing, because the company's publicly stated mission is to end oil. And so if we end oil because the Chinese have come in and taken all of our technology and scaled it, and then now are selling it to the rest of the world in 10 years, and that ends the world's addiction to oil, Shai would say, we won. But from our venture capitalist view, and from an employee shareholder view, there are multiple barriers to entry. One would be that while we were public about this idea early on, we have studied the hell out of this thing, right? We have done, because more than 10,000, you've heard the benchmark of 10,000 man hours gives you competitive edge. We've done many, many more than 10,000 hours of research and development on this thing. again, let me go back to HSBC. HSBC, in their due diligence, looked everywhere around the world for somebody that was coming up with something similar to us, and they couldn't find anything. And they put their money in. We've not yet seen anybody like us. We think we were helped by the downturn in the economy. The way Shai likes to describe it is, if somebody had a carbon copy of our business model, our PowerPoints, and our CAD CAMs and stuff, they would still have a hard time raising $200 million in this environment, in this economy. So the downturn in the economy kind of killed, or at least put on hold, any of the small competitors who think they could do something similar. The downturn in the economy and the decline in the price of oil also caused all the oil companies to put on hold drilling and investments in alternative energy, and same with the utilities, right? And now everyone is kind of coming back to life now that oil is back to $75, $80 a barrel, and the oil and the economy is slowly coming back to life.
Why don't we take one more question? One did you have?
I did. You quoted a figure of 10 cents per mile at $3 a gallon gasoline, right? But about a third of that $3 is tax, which we might hope the government uses for road tax. So my question is, did you include that 3 cents per mile in the electric car as well?
No. When we do our back of the envelope comparison for engagement like this, it's as simple. We try to get as simple as possible on the gas mile versus electric mile, but we have a more detailed model that takes into fact, subtracts tax or adds tax in depending on what market we're in. Sorry, sir, you're anxious.
The previous speaker here, UC Davis professor, said that he had a hard time understanding how you're going to make money off of residential customers if they're now charging 90% of the time at home. I mean, it's obviously value in the price per mile of an ICE car, gasoline, and the electricity. What makes you confident that you're going to, they're going to want to pay that money to you instead of, just charging 90% of the time at home and just occasionally?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things. One is we're not an electric reseller, right? We're not a utility. We don't just sell energy. We have not disclosed fully, but we sell a package of mobility services that includes access to the whole network. So you're not just buying energy. If you just want to buy energy, then just buy a plug-in and go home and plug in and pay the utility. So what you're going to see from us probably in the fourth quarter of this year is us articulate for the first time more of the consumer proposition and what you would get as that consumer. We also think in a market like the Bay Area, this area has a desire to be green, right? People will pay a premium to buy a Prius. People will pay a premium to be green. And so if we're offering a fully green consumer driving experience, they're going to pay for it, we think. And we've done actually consumer studies, proprietary research, primary research using Ipsos out of Paris, where we studied our 5 kind of key markets and asked consumers, I think 160 questions about EVs. And probably the bottom line is, I think most people would probably think that EVs are for tree huggers. What our research finds is that they cross every demographic scale. It's both kids, adults, moderate income families, wealthy families, across all the 5 markets. And really one of the drivers is how much education has been done either by the government or by industry or by the media on EVs, that they have a better concept than, it's a golf cart.
Please thank Joe.
Thank you. Thank you.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.